Good afternoon. On behalf of Center Pharmaceuticals, I would like to welcome the speakers and the moderator for this webinar. I would also like to welcome the audience for this webinar on respiratory noises in children and their clinical significance. At the outset, I would like to thank RespiStrong, India's first respiratory specific probiotic marketed by Center Pharmaceuticals, for sponsoring this webinar. They do not require any introduction. They are renowned in the field of pediatric pulmonology. I have the privilege of introducing the speakers as well as the moderator for today's webinar. Our first speaker is Dr. Hemant Kulkarni, who joins us from UK. He's a consultant in pediatrics, respiratory and sleep medicine at Sheffield's Children's Hospital, NHS Trust, UK. His clinical interests include general respiratory, CTI brush biopsies, sleep disordered breathing, and long-term ventilation. So good morning, sir. It's 5:30 in the morning, I suppose, in the UK. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, Dr. Mayuresh. It's a pleasure joining you.
Thank you. Our second speaker is Dr. Sagar Warankar, who is a consultant pulmonologist and interventional bronchoscopist at SRCT Mumbai, Jupiter Hospital, Apollo Hospital at Nerul. Dr. Sagar Warankar is a qualified pediatric pulmonologist with a strong experience. After his MBBS from Mumbai and his DNB from Chennai, he did his diploma in allergy, asthma, and immunology from CMC Vellore, and also a diploma from European Respiratory Society. Welcome, sir. Our third speaker is Dr. Shrikanta JT, who is a specialist in pediatric pulmonology, pediatric interventional pulmonology, sleep medicine from National University of Health Systems, Singapore, and Institute of Pulmonology. He's trained in interventional pulmonology at Apollo Specialty Hospitals, Jayanagar, Bangalore, and also from Italy. Special interests include pediatric pulmonary medicine, pediatric interventional pulmonology, sleep medicine, and allergy. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
It is my honor to introduce our moderator for the session today, Dr. Manisha Juvekar, who is a consultant pediatric pulmonologist and sleep specialist, practicing at Patil Healthcare Nerul, Juvekar Nursing Home. She is also a visiting fellow at Sheffield's Children's Hospital, UK, and KK Children's Hospital, Singapore. She specializes in international, as well as she's an internationally certified in sleep medicine. Her special field of interests are bronchoscopy, sleep medicine, pediatric LFT, and allergy. So welcome, madam. With this and without any further ado, I would like to pass on the session to Dr. Manisha Juvekar, who would moderate the session and also invite the speakers to speak on respiratory noises in children and their clinical significance. Over to you, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Mayuresh. I think it's a great pleasure. I think you've already introduced the speakers very well. And our today's session would be on respiratory noises in children. And we will be dealing exclusively with the respiratory noises which we encounter in our day-to-day practice. There is just one request for all the viewers and all my dear colleagues to use a microphone or a headphone or a earphone so that the audio visuals are absolutely clear to you. I think without wasting too much time, let me start with this first session. Now, if we talk about respiratory noises, what are respiratory noises? It happens, these adventitious sounds are basically the alteration of the physiological sounds. So we have multitude of different sounds that we see. Usually the sound, the noises, they help us in diagnosing or narrowing down our diagnosing to a specific anatomical site. Right, but sometimes these noises can vary from minute to minute. That's where our auscultation or experience would really matter. Now, before coming to what are the abnormal or what are the adventitious sounds, let me just go through these. What are the normal sounds that we usually experience? These are the tracheal, bronchial, bronchiovesicular, and vesicular sounds are the normal sounds. Each sound is heard at a different level of our respiratory channel. We have different kind of respiratory noises or adventitious sounds that we come across, but here we will be dealing with wheezing, stridor, snoring, and crackles or crepitations, as you know. The other commonly sounds which we hear is the stutter, nasal, snuffles, or grunting. But because of time constraints, we will be dealing only with wheezing, stridor, snoring, and crackles. So let me begin also. When we say about how does this respiratory noise help us in localizing a lesion? So usually, as a general rule, the inspiratory sounds depict that there is some kind of an extrathoracic lesion, whereas an expiratory sound would point towards an intrathoracic lesion. Again, the timing of the sounds would also be more important, whether it's an inspiratory sound, whether it's an expiratory sound, whether you hear it in the entire phase of respiration, whether the pitch is high, low, whether the sound is monophonic, polyphonic. All these different variation of a respiratory noise do hold importance when we are coming to a close diagnosis. Okay, now without further wasting too much time, I think we will start with the first case. So this is a 15-month-old child with sudden onset cough, difficulty in breathing since 1 day, history of fever since 1 day, which is low-grade fever. This child has already been diagnosed with viral triggered wheeze, required inhaled corticosteroids twice in the past year. He's been on ICS. Presently, also the child is on prophylactic ICS and as and when needed salbutamol. But the mother noticed that since morning, the frequency of coughing has increased. She's been giving him nebulization, but there has been no relief and the distress, in fact, has worsened. The child was brought to the emergency department and on examination, the child was afebrile, non-toxic. He was mildly tachypneic, tachycardic, but maintaining saturations of 93, 94 on room air. He had evidence of mild respiratory distress in the form of subcostal and intercostal recession. There was no grunting or cyanosis. The air entry was decreased on the left side of the chest and there was asymmetric breath sounds. Now, what we hear is, I would like to give everybody, I want everybody to give a listen to this. This is what we hear. I would play it again for speakers. So, Dr. Srikanta, what do you think could be the likely cause in this child, going with the history, the examination, and what you hear, and the respiratory noise that you hear?
This is a 15-month-old and has had 2 previous episodes of viral-induced or viral-triggered wheezes in the past, has been on prophylactic ICS and has been treated for the previous episodes with ICS and SABA. So 2 things I would want to ask even before going to the respiratory noises is, has the child been born normally? How the child has been in terms of its weight and development, and when did this particular sound start? Like you rightly pointed out, it just started since yesterday. But if you go back to the history, if the sound has been there from 6 weeks of life and it is there, it is not persistent, but it is there, and child is mildly tachypneic most of the times, especially
so the cough has been sudden. The child has been very well controlled on ICS. It is a very sudden onset of cough, difficulty in breathing. So the child till date was asymptomatic. There was nothing everything was going fine. From birth, the child has had just 2 episodes of ICS on which he's been very well controlled. The compliance is also very good.
Right. If most of the things have been taken care of, then this history is too acute for us. And looking at the acuteness of the history in a 15-month-old boy with probably sudden onset cough, difficulty in breathing, and the cough increasing since 1 day and increased labor breathing, mother seems to be giving nebulizations without any relief. This doesn't look to be a normal wheezing. This doesn't look to be a wheezing which is getting better with your SABAs. And on examination, when you mention that there is unequal air entry or there is left-sided air entry which is drastically or significantly diminished, at this particular juncture, I would think about in a 15-month-old toddler, suspected foreign body is on the high cards, and on listening to him, that is on the audio, he has both inspiratory as well as expiratory noises. The inspiratory noise and the expiratory noise seems to be quite significant, but the expiratory noise seems to be even more significant. So this seems to be more of a intrathoracic foreign body rather than a central foreign body. And looking at the examination, the left side seems to be significantly diminished. So it seems to be more of a left-sided foreign body. So putting into perspective, this is a left-sided foreign body, more in the left mainstem bronchus. And yeah, there we go.
Yeah. So, Dr. Hemant, what exactly do you mean by wheeze, and is it important to know what phase of wheezing it is occurring? Is it important to know whether it is monophonic, polyphonic? How important is it?
I mean, it's important to understand what wheeze is in the first place. It's very commonly confused, and the term itself means different things to different people. And this is going back to the origin of the word wheeze. It comes from the word hiss, and it's basically a high-pitched whistling sound, and it occurs due to the narrowed airways. Now, the location of the narrowed airways has an important role to play in the pitch and the intensity of the sound.
So how important is it? Yeah.
So if you hear a monophonic wheeze, it usually means it's coming from the larger airways. If it's polyphonic, which means you have intensity of the various intensity of the sound, then it's usually from the lower airways. And this is due to vibrations or oscillations of the partially closed airways that cause the sound.
So would the severity of the wheeze matter?
So, so most of the wheeze that is described is usually expiratory. But if you start hearing inspiratory wheeze as well, then you probably know that the location is more proximal to the mouth rather than distal. And this is useful to know whether it's originating from the larger airways or the smaller airways. So, I mean, from a clinical perspective, if we hear a polyphonic sound, it's usually more distal from the smaller airways. If it's monophonic, it's usually from the upper airways.
Okay, so Dr. Sagar, what are the differentials that you can think of in this child? Is there anything else other than foreign body that we can think of in this child?
See, since this is a very acute presentation, so this is straightforward that this is a case of some foreign body. But usually, any child who is not who is having recurrent wheezing and he's not getting better with your regular MDI therapy, then you can think about something like recurrent viral infection like atypical, or in this child sudden acute atypical infection, or some anatomical not this child, but in infancy or less than 2 years of children, you can think about something like central airway disease like Malaysia's problem.
Can we such acute history? Can we think of any inhalational or any allergic reaction, something like an angioneurotic or something like inhaled smoke or dust? Can these kids also come with this kind of presentation?
Yes, definitely. They can. There can be a very severe acute exacerbation of asthma-like presentation. It could be because of sudden exposure to smoke or sudden exposure to some inhalation of any toxic substance that can be possible in this type of acute injury.
Presentation.
Yeah, acute.
So I will just I just want the speakers to have a look at the X-ray, and this is the X-ray that we have seen. So Dr. Srikanta, can you comment on the X-ray? Can you tell us what exactly are we seeing on the X-ray?
Definitely. So basically, this is a anteroposterior view of a chest X-ray of a 15-month-old, And what we can see from the X-ray is the slight anteroposterior, that is, child is slightly rotated to the right side. That is, the right hemithorax is a little bit more prominent on the right side. And even though it is slightly prominent, still there is significant deviation of the trachea to the right side. And to a certain extent, there is a little bit of crowding of ribs on the right side with a significant amount of hyperinflation on the left side. So you can see the left cardiophrenic angle quite significantly well, as well as the left cardiophrenic, the postophrenic. And there's a little bit of collapse consolidation that we can see in the right upper part. So sorry, left upper part. So again,
anything particular you can tell about this part or the left side? So you think the pathology is on the left or the right?
So basically, it seems to be pathology on the left side. And I can still say that this just cannot be one-sided foreign body, because there's bilateral shadowing that we can see. So this can be just a flipping, flopping, or a migratory foreign body. So probably it had occluded the right side and has just got shifted to the left side. Or it is a foreign body that is just stuck on the left side, and which is causing only unilateral left lower lobe hyperinflation. So again, so at least from the finding, it looks like it is a flip by a migratory foreign body. It has flipped from one side to other side, or it is just a unilateral foreign body which is stuck in the left lower lobe, which is hyperinflated with partial atelectasis of the left upper lobe, as well as significant mediastinal shift of the mediastinal shift to the right side, causing a little bit of partial atelectasis of the right side.
So blood investigation wise, it was all fine. So this is the differential we need to keep in mind if there is any foreign body aspiration. If the child has developed any anaphylactic reaction secondary to the peanut, probably he may not have aspirated, but because of peanut, he might develop an anaphylaxis causing laryngeal edema, inhalational laryngeal, like Sagar said. It could be any smoke or dust, fire injuries, and acute viral pulmonary infections can also come in this way. So we did the bronchoscopy, and Dr. Sagar, would you want to comment on this scope? Unfortunately, we don't have the video. This is just the picture that we had. So what do you think this foreign body could be, and what are the commonest foreign bodies that you usually encounter?
Dr. Sagar, your audio is mute.
Yeah.
So here directly, this is straightforward. You can see at the carina, the right main bronchus can be seen very nice and clear, but the left main bronchus, you see there is some yellow mucus like thing, and so this most likely because of some foreign body, there is adhesion of mucus, so definite diagnosis of foreign body. So we don't know exactly which foreign body, but in this from this picture, but the commonest foreign bodies we see are vegetative foreign bodies like peanut or chana dal or some type of dal, and sometimes you see some plastic foreign bodies also in small children. But these are the commonest seen, so mostly vegetative foreign bodies.
Okay, Dr. Srikanta, you want to say something?
Yeah, so just looking at the scopy, it looks like it is completely occluding the left mainstem bronchus itself.
Yeah.
So left mainstem bronchus is completely occluded, as well as because this is a very acute foreign body, I'm not seeing any significant granulation tissue formed. But definitely this looks to be a significant foreign body which is obstructing the left mainstem bronchus. And looking at the way it is, it looks more often like a peanut only.
Right. Dr. Hemant, any precaution that we need to take when we have to extract these foreign bodies, and what are the complications? We are not going to go too much into detail. Just for our viewers, we want to just let them know what are the precautions that we need to take if if we have to undergo, if this child has to undergo a scopy, and what kind of scopy would you want to do on this child?
So this is where it gets difficult because if you don't have the right equipment, you may end up with more trouble than leaving the foreign body where it is. Because if you try and remove this, because it's already been there for a while, this can break into multiple parts and go further down the airway, and which may become impossible to retrieve. And this is where you need the help of a good ENT surgeon who can take it out, or you need the right equipment with a Domio basket that can bring it out whole without breaking it into pieces.
Right. So this was,
one of the other things to remember is quite a lot of these foreign bodies in infants under the age of 2 are not radio opaque because they're all organic. And it's important to bear in mind when interpreting the X-ray itself that you're not looking for a radio opaque foreign body. These are impossible to pick up on X-rays.
Okay. So we have to use a rigid scope.
Yes.
So again, so I just want to bear in here. So it depends on how good your center is, how good your bronchoscopist is, and if the bronchoscopist is good enough to even convert the child into rigid bronchoscope on the table. So it depends on the center that you work in and the expertise that you have. It can be done with just a flexible bronchoscopy with Dornier basket, like Dr. Hemant has already explained. Or if the Dornier basket is not really retrieving the whole foreign body as a whole and the foreign body breaks into pieces, then probably you might have to convert this into a rigid bronchoscope and hold the foreign body in total and then come out. So again, it depends on the center, it depends on the expertise of the person who's doing it, as well as the type of foreign bodies. So that's what it is.
So you also wanted to say, comment something on this?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to tell.
Okay, fine. So we'll just move on to the next case. Sorry to cut you short because I think we have a lot of cases. We are falling short of time. So we have already dealt with the precautions which we need to remove a foreign body. We go to case B. Here we have a 15-year-old girl, a known case of asthma on inhaled corticosteroids. Good compliance, but she has had history of breathlessness since the last few days. She's developed cough, which was initially intermittent for the last 2 weeks, but it has now become continuous since the last 3 to 4 days. She continues to be on her ICS, but symptoms persisted. Now she has history of chest pain, weight loss, and loss of appetite. She visited her pediatrician, who increased the dose of her ICS, gave her a short course of antibiotics, but she did not have any relief and the wheeze worsened. On examination, she was tachypneic, mild tachycardia. Saturation was maintained. There was evidence of respiratory distress with recessions. Air entry was decreased bilaterally. Here we have a wheeze which is bilateral throughout the chest and occasionally crackles. So when we have there, we dealt with a child who had unilateral decreased air entry with unilateral wheeze. Now here we have a child where air entry is decreased bilaterally on inhaled corticosteroids, and you hear a monophonic wheeze throughout the chest. A 15-year-old girl now. And what is the differential, Dr. Sagar, that you have to offer in this child? She's already well compliant on her ICS.
So this is really unusual to see the monophonic wheeze throughout the chest and occasional cribs, because this known case of asthmatic on ICS, and as you mentioned that she's her compliance is good, mostly her technique, so that should be sorted out. So her technique is good, but still she's not improving. So there might be and since this is going on since last almost 1 month, as the previous slide showed, almost 2 to 3 weeks, and she's not getting better. So I think this could be a very severe attack of acute exacerbation of asthma. And since she's on a long term, since long time she's on ICS, so the possibility of other, so possibility of other, so possibility of other diagnosis also should be kept in mind, like ABPA, that is Aspergillus bronchopulmonary aspergillosis, as well as in India you should not. We have to think about tuberculosis in any patient. There is a weight loss, increase in cough, and as you said, there is a chest pain also. So I will keep that also in my mind.
So we went ahead and did the X-ray. Anything on X-ray, Dr. Hemant, that you would want to see? Anything that you want to comment on? The X-rays 2 weeks prior and 2 weeks presently.
If you look at the X-ray, what is quite obvious is there are changes at the on the right middle right lower lobe, around the costophrenic angle and the cardiophrenic angle. And that's something to bear in mind before you plan the next set of investigations.
Okay. So what would you want to do for her next?
Given the acute scenario, given that her saturations are less than 94, you would want to manage her acutely to bring her to a state where you can do further investigations.
So we have done all her investigations, blood investigation, blood culture, sputum culture, AFB culture, and acute phase reactions. Everything has been done. Any other investigation that you would want to do, and you see that everything else has come negative? Any other intervention that you would want to do?
If everything is fine so far, what you want to figure out is what's causing that. And if it is, again, going back to the lobe that is involved, you want to check whether there is a foreign body or anything extrinsic, intrinsic that's occluding the airway. You want to investigate that with.
So we went ahead and so these are the differentials that we had to offer. One was an endobronchial tuberculosis, bronchial adenoma, considering the age. Was there any vascular compression? There is an entity called as paradoxical vocal cord motion. I think we would be, if we get time, we would talk on that. But as of now, I think we went ahead and we did the scopy, and maybe Dr. Srikanda, once you can have a look at the scopy, and any of you can. I have just trimmed it, so we just come at the pathology. So I would just want to play it again and. So what we are trying to say, what do you see here? Go back.
So basically, I'm not able to appreciate which segment or which particular lobe this is, but there seems to be a significant amount of caseating material there. So again, caseation, can it be made out very clearly in this video? It's a little difficult, but still there is some whitish secretion that is there, that is occluding the whole subsegmental bronchi, and that is causing this particular girl to have the right middle lobe and a little bit of right lower lobe collapse consolidation kind of a picture, with the hemidiaphragm being elevated quite significantly. So looking at this caseation material involving only one of the subsegment, it seems to be more or less tubercular in nature.
Right. Dr. Sagar, you want to add anything to that?
No, that's what. So there is a definite caseation can be seen in, I don't know exactly which lobe, but definitely there is a caseation and it's occluding completely.
Okay, fine. So this child was diagnosed with endobronchial TB. Now, in these cases, do you think spirometry would be of any value? Not these. I mean to say in a child with wheeze, where you want to know, do you go ahead and do a spirometry if you think the child is able to do a spirometry?
If a child is hypoxic in an acute situation, I would never do spirometry, and especially if your suspicion is about TB, then you have to be sure about your infection control strategies, because you may aerosolize a lot of bacteria there.
Okay, fine. So yeah.
I just have one question. Why would this girl have bilateral monophonic wheeze?
So we needed to rule out, probably it could be an asthma over exacerbation of endotracheal. So both entities can actually, be together. So it is not. So maybe endobronchial TB was one of the diagnoses which would be super added. We have not worked her up completely. So
Again, just see, because this girl, now that we know that she has endobronchial TB and the right middle lobe to a certain extent, more of right lower lobe involved with significant hemidiaphragm elevation, there should have been significant unilateral finding rather than bilateral finding in this girl, one. And secondly, the most important thing is you are not going to have a monophonic wheeze which is bilateral unless there is central airway, that is trachea, which is involved, or the lesion is in bilateral bronchi. That is, you can have something at the carina, you can have in bilateral bronchi. That is when you can have this bilateral monophonic wheeze. Until we do not have these, there is unlikely that this particular girl had bilateral monophonic wheeze. Again, what I would just wanted to tell from this particular presentation is that when you have a bilateral monophonic wheeze, it doesn't mean always unilateral pathology. At least from the case,
Absolutely.
it looks like
Absolutely.
a unilateral pathology, not a bilateral pathology.
Yeah.
And we always need to be very, very careful in interpreting our signs. Not all the signs will be matching up to our clinical conclusion. At the same time, not all clinical conclusions will be inconsistent with the clinical features.
Yeah, so that's what I when initially I saw monophonic wheeze bilaterally, which is very, very unusual presentation for any child who is known case of asthma as well.
Right. So I think here we come to the statement of the cliche statement of all that wheezes is not asthma. Anyways, these are few of the other X-rays we had seen. We are not going to describe much in detail, but I just thought that again these two kids had presented with foreign body. Anyways, we go to the next case now. So we have a 12-month-old baby with history of noisy breathing since few days after birth. She was seen by a pediatrician, counseled and reassured that the noise would disappear with age, and she was advised to follow up if required. But since last few days, the baby has had difficulty in breathing, and the intensity of the sound has increased. She has intermittent history of choking and vomiting. This is intermittent history. It's not with every feed. She has developed failure to thrive. The sound is more when the child is crying or when the child is feeding. On examination, there was mild tachypnea, tachycardia, saturation though is maintained. She had evidence of respiratory distress with retractions and stridorous breathing. Air entry was equal bilaterally. There were no other adventitious sounds which were heard. Dr. Hemant, after the history, can you kind of come to a differential? What are we dealing with?
So, looking at your history and the examination finding that you've just put up, what is worrying to me is the saturations there. It's 92 for a child that's presented to you. So this is one of the things to watch out for, because if you're looking at a differential of laryngomalacia as one of the options, this child is in a precarious position here because there's something that has stripped this child over the cliff.
So the first thing which crosses your mind is laryngomalacia. So
that's one of the first differentials. The other things to watch out for are, is there any, again, extrinsic, intrinsic, or in the wall pathologies in the extrathoracic airway. So what I'm looking at here is, because it's the stridor, it's probably an extrathoracic airway involvement of the large airways that could be causing this finding. So yes, laryngomalacia is top of the list, but we have to rule out other things as well.
So I will just play the video, and again, I would want all the speakers to hear it. Okay. So I think it is not basically rocket science to know that it's a stridor. What my question to Dr. Srikanta would be, what kind of a stridor are we dealing with? What kind, and what are the different types of stridor? What do you mean by stridor? What are the types of stridor that we see usually?
Can you just replay the video for the interest of the audience? Right. So basically, the stridor is a very high-pitched sound that usually comes from our extrathoracic airways. And our extrathoracic airways are usually until up to third or fourth tracheal cartilage. That is where our the thoracic inlet begins. And so anybody who comes to us, say, from the nose until the third or fourth tracheal cartilage, presenting with a high monophonic high-pitched sound, is usually what we call as stridor, and anything that is below our thoracic inlet is what we usually call as wheezing. And this is usually because of turbulent airflow to a partially obstructed airway. And some of the differential diagnoses that we would consider in a child presenting at any age or depending on that particular ages, say if a child presents at birth, immediately after birth. So we talk about laryngomalacias, which are the most commonest differential diagnosis or the most commonest diagnosis that we come at. Apart from laryngomalacias, we also have significant causes of stridor, like children presenting with bilateral choanal atrasias or choanal stenosis, child presenting with significant amount of
so this is a 10-month-old child.
Absolutely. So in this particular child, the child started having a stridor. You just asked me about differential diagnosis, but coming to this particular child started with a stridor from birth, that is from a couple of days after birth, and continue to have stridor. And the stridor would increase only during feeding or during lying down positions, and child would get better when the child was picked up. This particular increase in stridor during this particular time could be because of an infection that has stripped this particular child. So could be a laryngomalacia with a secondary viral infection, or if the child is significantly failing to thrive at 12 months of age, we would consider other differential diagnoses here. So other differential diagnoses, particularly in a child who is first born, I would definitely think about vocal cord papillomas or laryngeal, or I would think about valvular cysts or subglottic hemangiomas, multiple causes which can cause stridor. But in this particular child, my first differential would be laryngomalacia with a secondary bronchiolitis. But other possibilities definitely have to be thought about because child is failing to thrive.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt you on that. So is it so the stridor which you heard just now for all the speakers, was it is it important to know what kind of a stridor it is? Like, is it an inspiratory stridor? Is it a biphasic stridor?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is what I meant. So, so stridor, again, going back, if we classify stridors, it is above the vocal cords, from the vocal cords until up to the second or third tracheal cartilage, and below that. So we don't call expiratory stridors, because expiratory stridors is something that is usually utilized by the American group, but not usually by the rest of them. So anything below our thoracic inlet is always V's. So stridor, which is above our vocal cords, that is from the nose until the vocal cord, is usually stridors. And by this, we can actually pinpoint where the pathology is. And from the vocal cords until our third or fourth tracheal cartilage, usually they are biphasic. And biphasic stridors usually gives away the diagnosis that it is at the level of third or fourth tracheal cartilage, that is from the vocal cord until third or fourth tracheal cartilage. And depending on this, we can actually give a significant, reasonable amount of differential diagnosis.
Absolutely. So any other causes, like we have already dealt with this about laryngomalacia, cyst, or a double aortic arch. So Dr. Sagar, in such child, would you want to do a bronchoscopy? In this child, would you want to scope him?
Yes, of course. Not every child, but there are some important clues for pediatrician when to send for the bronchoscopy and when to evaluate, because most of the time they say it's a laryngomalacia, don't bother about it, and then don't follow with the weight whether the child is having GR like reflux, because most of the children will have a little bit of GR like reflux. So the most important thing is if there is stridor from early period. So laryngomalacia usually it's present 2 to 3 weeks later after birth. So any stridor since the birth.
So how long would you want to wait if you think that the child has come to you the first time, and how long are you going to wait till you scope the child?
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So any stridor since birth, and if it's causing respiratory distress, failure to thrive, and if at all there is a dyspnea or a recurrent respiratory infections, or failure to thrive, as well as episode of cyanosis because of too much of constrictions, either cyanosis or during feeding choking like episodes, or some children with extrinsic type of compression, they will have pulmonary hypertension also.
Okay.
So any child with failure to thrive, dysphonia or aphonia also, you have to do bronchoscopy, bronchoscopy, or just do a video laryngoscopy also can be helpful initially, but bronchoscopy
we went ahead. Fine. So we went ahead and did the scopy. So you can have just a look at the scopy. Dr. Hemant, would you want to explain as we go? Like, what are the structures that we are seeing?
The scope has now gone through the upper airway. It's reached the glottis, the epiglottis, and the crescent-shaped structure you can see from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock is the epiglottis. What you see behind where the arrow is being pointed are the cricoid cartilages and the arytenoid cartilages. And if you can continue with the video, please. And as you go through, the tip of the flexible bronchoscope has now gone past the epiglottis. You can see the interarytenoid space there. And in between the vocal folds, you can see a shiny, glistening film. I've not seen this video before, so I'm trying to explain as I'm going through. It's a film that is probably occluding the airway and has a very narrow fish mouth-like opening, which is about 10% of the size of the normal glottic opening that you'll see. So this child has probably been managing with quite a significant amount of airway compromise for the past many months.
What do you think this is?
This is probably a laryngeal web. Probably looks like a laryngeal web.
Okay, fine. So we are not going to go too much on the details of managing a laryngeal web. Okay. So, I think just to summarize, this was a child who had come with noisy breathing and failure to thrive, seen by a pediatrician, and reassured, thinking that it could be laryngomalacia, referred to come only SOS. The child developed failure to thrive, dyspnea, and the intensity of the sound increased. In such cases, it is essential that we use the clinical acumen and do scopy wherever it is available, because the child eventually would be a very catastrophe if we do not intervene. Okay, so we go to this next case. It's a 10-month-old child with similar history of noisy breathing, almost similar history like our previous one. Same episode, history of increasing during feeding and crying, episodes of vomiting. He has history of recurrent chest infection for which he's never been admitted, but he's always required oral antibiotic. Otherwise, the child is gaining weight, but parents are very apprehensive and they want us to intervene. So this is, I would suggest everyone to just have a listen to this child. Before I play this video, I just want all the three speakers to listen, because to the different phases, and explain to our viewers what are we dealing with. Play it again. Was it audible? I think was it? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, Dr. Srikanta, what would you say? Is it different from the previous child that we heard, or is it the same? Because
definitely.
It is, yeah.
Definitely. So the previous child that we saw was more of upper inspiratory stridor, and there the character was very high pitched, and there was only one tone to that particular pitch. In this particular child, I'm able to hear both inspiratory as well as expiratory noises, and child is not only having difficulty in breathing in, but also difficulty in breathing out. So this seems to be more of a biphasic stridor. And biphasic stridor, again, like I said, if you know how the child is breathing and how child is having this particular sound, then biphasic stridor differential becomes that much more easier for us.
So, Dr. Sagar, what are the differentials you would think of if you're thinking of biphasic stridor?
So as Srikanta already last time mentioned, that anything below the vocal cord, so from the subglottis region until the trachea, third or fourth cartilage ring, anything occluding from inside, outside can be a presentation of biphasic stridor. So if you see something like this, if there is infectious cause, then it could be because of vocal cord paralysis. The most commonest is vocal cord paralysis, bilateral, or subglottic stenosis, mainly either congenital or it could be because of acquired, like post intubation, child who is on prolonged ventilation, or something like some tracheal stenosis or vascular ring, which is which is too much
this
to
child,
occlude.
if this child has to go to a pediatrician and not to a pulmonologist, and if you see this child, can it still be laryngomalacia?
Possible, but laryngomalacia usually, as mentioned, that above the vocal cord, very, very unlikely to have biphasic stridor. So biphasic stridor is mainly from the below the vocal cord until the just above the carina or third to fourth cartilage ring. So very unlikely to have biphasic stridor in a child having laryngomalacia.
Anything, Dr. Hemant, you want to add to biphasic stridor?
I think it is important to basically recognize that this child may have either a severe single pathology below the cords or may have a dual pathology. As you mentioned, it could have laryngomalacia to start off, but may also have something else. And this is a child that definitely needs medical attention sooner than later.
So we actually the child did have this pathology, but yes, eventually he had a cleft as well. But we don't have that video, so I will just playing the initial video which we have, and maybe you can just tell us what it is. What is happening here?
So again, what you can see is the epiglottis and the vocal cord openings. You can see the two arytenoid cartilages, but they are much more separated compared to the previous video we saw. And this is where we may have to rule out what is called a laryngeal cleft. Now, a laryngeal cleft is very difficult to rule out with a simple flexible bronchoscopy. And this may need a more detailed airway assessment than a simple flexible.
Right. Anything, Dr. Srikanta, that you want to comment on this scoping?
Yeah, so basically, apart from just the laryngeal cleft, I would also want to add that the posterior pharyngeal wall is significantly collapsing here. So that would be the most important finding here. Right. And that could be the one which is causing significant respiratory stridor in this particular child.
Right.
Again, what leaves us unclear is what is the cause of significant expiratory noise.
What do you mean by significant collapse?
Yeah, so significant expiratory noise is again very, very, it's not very clear in this particular video, but I would want to go into the vocal cords, look at the subglottic area, go and scope until the third or fourth cartilage and until up to carina, see what is happening to the, but at least when we peep into peep in beyond the vocal cords seems to be reasonably okay. There is no subglottic stenosis. The subglottis as well as a little bit below seems to be reasonably normal. So this child probably, like you rightly pointed out, has had a laryngomalacia which has gotten better. But is the laryngomalacia only the possibility? Unlikely, because there is also significant collapsibility of the posterior pharyngeal wall, which is leading this particular child to also have failure to thrive.
The video which we would want to see. What is happening here? Is it clear? Is it seen?
I think we have lost the moderator.
I think there's some connection error.
So just before Dr. Manisha comes back, so let us just summarize on the sounds that we've heard. We've had a significant, again, that we can call the first case as a biphasic stridor or a biphasic problem where you could hear both inspiratory noise as well as an expiratory noise. But there, the expiratory noise was quite significant than the inspiratory noise. So we can call that as more of a wheeze compared to a biphasic stridor or an inspiratory stridor. And any child who presents with a significant expiratory component, we always need to think about lower airway pathology. So lower airway pathology starts from your third or fourth tracheal ring and goes beyond it. And any child who presents with unilateral hyperinflation, that is on chest X-ray, or unilateral finding, that is monophonic wheeze, reduced air entry, or any other signs, we always think about a unilateral pathology. And if it is a bilateral pathology where you can see, like you can hear bilateral monophonic wheezing, a child who's presented to you at 6 months of age with multiple hospitalizations every monthly, you always think about tracheobronchomalacias or a vascular ring or a pulmonary sling. So these differentials have to be thought about for lower airway pathologies. The second case that we looked at about was inspiratory stridor, and inspiratory stridors can be from our nasal passages until our vocal cords. So nasal passages from a simple choanal stenosis, that is unilateral choanal stenosis, can also cause significant amount of inspiratory stridors in newborns, until up to our laryngomalacia, laryngeal webs, and vocal cord paralysis, vocal cord palsies. So all are differential diagnosis of your inspiratory stridors. The biphasic stridor is a different entity. It's a different pathology. And anybody and everybody who deals with pediatric pulmonology or are interested in pediatric pulmonology always have to differentiate between inspiratory stridor and biphasic stridor. And biphasic stridor, like already have been mentioned in the previous slides, always think about pathologies between your vocal cords until the third and fourth tracheal rings. Please ask the history, birth history. Birth history is very important, because if there is a forceps delivery, it can definitely cause injury to your recurrent laryngeal nerve and cause paralysis of your right or left vocal cords. Apart from that, a firstborn male child or firstborn female child, normal vaginal delivery comes with biphasic stridor. Always think about the laryngeal papillomas or vocal cord papillomas. Apart from that, any birthmarks that you can see, or any neurocutaneous markers you see, from neurofibromas to hemangiomas. So all these are significant differential diagnosis of a child presenting with biphasic stridors. And then coming to the last that we saw, a child presenting with unilateral, that is foreign body obstruction because of endobronchial caseating tuberculosis. So that also can cause a certain amount of wheezing as well as a certain amount of unilateral pathology. So all wheezes are not due to asthma, and all stridors are not because of laryngomalacia. And that is what Dr. Manisha wanted to bring out from this particular presentation. We still have a couple of more cases to add on, I suppose. And
should join back.
Another thing which I would like to add to that bronchoscopy video was the method in which the bronchoscopy is done. So you mentioned about the posterior pharyngeal wall collapse there, and it totally depends on what was the type of anesthetic used, whether it's done an awake child, mildly sedated, fully sedated, crying child, because that can totally change the features of what you see around the bronchoscope above the glottis.
Absolutely right. So any child who has presented to you with a failure to thrive, significant amount of stridor, and child has had episodes of choking and cyanosis, always do a bronchoscopy with a word of caution. Always have everything set up so that if the child crashes, you have all the intubating, all the equipments that you can use to save this child in case of an emergency. And at least what my bosses have taught me is, when you have this particular child who has had significant failure to thrive with so many significant problems, until you do not evaluate your upper airway, do not sedate the child.
Yeah, exactly.
It is definitely perfectly fine for you not to sedate the child until you see that there is nothing that is collapsing your epiglottis. See, if you have a valvular cyst, which is causing a significant inspiratory stridor, you give a sedation, say it can be midazolam, it can be fentanyl, it can be ketamine. You just push the anesthetic into the child's vein, suddenly the whole thing crashes and you will have a severe airway compromise. So unless you do not know what is happening in the upper airway, please do not anesthetize or please do not sedate the child. And that is what Dr. Hemant wanted to put forward. Anything Dr. Sagar wants to add?
So usually, as both of you said, before entering into the main airway, as you said that first inspect the oral cavity, then pharynx, then larynx, and then usually we anesthetize the child. Until unless we examine completely the upper airway, we should not give anesthesia. That's what we do while doing bronchoscopy. And always doing bronchoscopy is it's easy for those who can intubate, but the only problem is those who knows the consequences. They know what can happen if you do it improperly.
So am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm so sorry for all the delay. I don't know for all the glitches. I'm really extremely sorry. So we go back. Okay, so I think the management wise, we again won't go too much into the management of these cases. I think somebody's phone is on. You hear something in background?
I think it's Shrikant, your phone probably.
Your phone is there? Okay. So we go to, so we've dealt with wheeze and stridor. Now we go to our third case. This is an 8-year-old boy brought with his mother with history of disturbed sleep and persistent loud snoring since last few years, which has gradually increased in intensity. He also complains of frequent awakenings in the night, trying to breathe. He has difficulty of breathing while sleeping, also keeps his mouth open perpetually, even when he doesn't have a nose block. He has history of recurrent allergic rhinitis, for which he was given anti-allergics and intranasal steroids. The mother has noticed that he's become very impulsive. There are behavioral changes in the form of hyperactivity. On examination, we told the mother to get a small clipping from home. Developmentally, the child seems to be normal for his age. Local examination, there is just hypertrophic turbinates, but no evidence of any tonsillar enlargement at present. Systemic examination, we didn't find anything abnormal. So, Dr. Sagar, what do you think this probably could be?
So, if you see, can you go back to the so he's an 8-year-old with a lot of disturbed sleep and snoring at the night, so and frequent awakening. So he's having significant amount of obstructive sleep apnea at night, and so this is so we don't know whether it is because of allergic rhinitis or anything else. So this is the child who is, as well as because of this obstructive sleep apnea, he's having different behavior. So he's become hyperactive, and he has become irritated also.
So before I think I go ahead with the speakers, I think there is a word which I would want to spread to our fellow pediatrician. I think not just here, but I think all over, that whenever you have a child who presents as ADHD or hyperactivity impulsively, please do go back and ask this peculiar history of snoring or scholastic backwardness or daytime somnolence or hyperactivity. So I think this is something which is being far ignored in our country, and we really need to take a stand over it. So anyways, the mother gave us a clip, and this is the clip that we got from home. This is the part which I want everyone to see. Okay. So, Dr. Shrikanta, what is happening to this child?
Yeah, so basically what we are seeing in the video clip is that child is actually having a respiratory pause after the obstruction that is intervening his breathing, or obstructing his breathing, is increasing, and at a particular level he obstructs so significantly that he's unable to breathe in, and he wakes up with a choke. So basically what he's doing is this is what he's doing. So obstruction to a level that there is no air entry that is getting into his lungs, and then that is a tipping point where he chokes and he wakes up to gasp for breath, and that is what he's doing.
Absolutely. So what do you mean by snoring, Dr. Hemant? What basically is the pathology? I think Dr. Shrikanta has already explained. Would you be able to explain to our viewers on the image that we are seeing?
Okay, so as Dr. Shrikanta mentioned, it is a monophonic high-pitch sound originating from the upper airway. And this is because there are parts of your upper airway that can become quite floppy, especially in a phase of sleep called REM sleep. And when this happens, the airway flow gets obstructed. And because of the negative pressure from the chest, the air that goes through produces a lot of vibrations. And you can see the blue bits, which is the tongue, the posterior pharyngeal wall, the nasopharynx, the uvula, and the retropharyngeal space, the retroglossal space, are all involved in producing this sound. This is usually multi-level, never one level, but sometimes it's, in children with dysmorphism, you can have, because of a large tongue or a high arch palate, that can cause the sounds.
Right. So we'll be coming to that. So is there something which Dr. Sagar, you want to comment on these images here? What are we seeing? These are the enlarged adenoids or tonsils. Is there something which we want to explain to the viewers on this?
So these are, I'm guessing Sagar is probably off his microphone.
Okay, so no problem. You can go ahead, Dr. Hemant. You can answer. Okay.
So these are pictures of tonsils and adenoids that can cause the airway obstruction, and are usually the most common cause of sleep disordered breathing or obstructive sleep apnea in children who are otherwise neurologically well and don't have any other syndromes. Oh, in fact, Sagar is back. I'll hand over to Sagar.
Sagar, Dr. Sagar, anything you want to comment on these images? What do you think is wrong with this child?
Most common cause of this type of presentation in children, what we see in usual practice, is because of allergic rhinitis, and they may have adrenal hypertrophy, not tonsillar, but mostly it's adrenal hypertrophy due to secondary to the allergic rhinosinusitis. And so what you see in this image is, of course, the palate and adenoid tissues and tonsils. If this adenoid tissue is increased in size and significantly reducing or obstructing the airway, so what happens at night, it is very difficult. And in children, those who are having some syndromes like Down syndrome or any other syndrome like Prader-Willi syndrome, the children will have large palate as well as they are little bit hefty and obese. So what happens during the night, there is a fall of tongue on the backside also, and that can cause more obstruction. So as rightly mentioned, it's a problem with not just because of adrenal tissue, it is a problem of complete your multiple levels.
So what do we plan to do with this child? What do we need to do now? Should we go ahead with any investigation? Is it required, or we just leave and reassure the child? What is the plan?
No, of course, in this type of patient, it is better to because already he's not only he's having obstructive sleep apnea like thing, but he's suffering because of that with hyperactivity behavior, as well as he must be having some other issues like nighttime bed waiting. Then there will be scholastic performance has decreased. So there are so many issues this happen with the children.
Basically, there is a lot of hypoxia which is happening, right?
Yes. So in this child, it is mandatory to do the further investigation to rule out what is the exact cause and what exactly is causing this and how significantly is affecting his sleep. So first investigation, I would like to do the thorough examination whether there's any allergic rhinitis or any allergic thing is there. Second, I would definitely do the X-ray for adenoids to see how much it is obstructing.
So this child has snoring even when there is no allergic rhinitis, there is no.
So definitely the next investigation, next investigation which is very, very important in this child is definitely sleep study. Polysomnography, which is very, very important in this check.
So so initially this child had undergone an oximetry because sometimes polysomnography is not available everywhere. Dr. Shrikanta, anything that you want to comment on the oximetry? What is oximetry? Is it like a preliminary thing that we need to do? I mean, quickly, in short, if you can just tell us a little bit.
Right. So nocturnal oximetry is a study. It's a limited study with which records only your oxygen saturation as well as your heart rate.
So anything that you're seeing on here on this?
Yes. So basically, what I wanted to tell was, see, you cannot just put on a simple pulse oximetry and say this is what I want to use, because what is being used or what should be used is a pulse oximetry which measures beat to beat variability. So from one beat to another beat, the heart rate as well as pulse has to be measured continuously. You cannot have approximation of say 6 seconds or 10 seconds from one value to another value, and there are specific machines for it. And in this particular oximetry, what you can see is there are two things. One is the SpO2 as well as the pulse rate. What you can see is the baseline saturation of this child itself is somewhere between 94 to 95%, at least what I can look at. And as the sleep starts progressing, what we can see is the child's dipping in saturation is quite significant. It is dipping less than 88 possibly, and the dip starts worsening as the day progresses. That marks us to the stages where REM sleeps are most significant and predominant. At the same time, you can see that when the saturations are dipping, you can see heart rate also simultaneously increasing, and the heart rate increases quite significantly as a.
So this child does become a candidate for doing an extensive polysomnography.
Absolutely.
Right. So we went ahead and did a polysomnography. I think this is more or less the same. I would not want to run it for a long time. This is what we had. So we did, and his oximetry value is 54%. Saturations was going below 89%. I think we won't go too much on detail on the apnea hypopnea index, which was 22, which was way above for a normal child. This is how we would want to do polysomnography. And Dr. Hemant, would you just tell us what is happening here? What are we doing here?
So polysomnography is an investigation modality to investigate for various sleep disorders, not just sleep disordered breathing or obstructive sleep apnea. And what you can see there is a short is a video clip probably of somebody who's sleeping with various bands and probes attached. What you see on the top half of the slide are the EEG waves, which help us find out what stage of sleep you are, whether you're awake or asleep.
So what I want to ask you, is it some kind of an invasive procedure? Do the parents need to be, a little apprehensive, or how do you think you're going to help them? Or, people are very apprehensive, like what is sleep study? Do we really need to do in a child who's snoring? Half the world in India is snoring.
Okay, so so polysomnography is a non-invasive test. That's the first thing. It is basically somebody watching you being asleep with various probes and wires attached to you. So it's as simple as that. It is non-invasive and it doesn't require any extra effort than what you would need. The question is where it is done. In some places it could be done at home. In some places it is done on a sleep lab or in a hospital bed.
So every child who comes to you for snoring, you're going to go and do a polysomno?
No. So this is about deciding whether there is primary snoring versus an obstructive sleep apnea. And what we do in our hospital is we start off with a screening oximetry. Now, if this oximetry is negative, it is very likely there's a 97% predictive value that your PSG may be abnormal. But if the oximetry is normal, then this becomes quite difficult. Then you have to decide on a clinical basis which patient goes down the PSG route. Does that answer your question, Dr. Manisha?
So what are these lines that you're seeing here? What is this? What are they trying to depict here? What is this line?
The slide you've given me here is a screenshot of what an oximetry looks like, also of a PSG looks like. So the top half of that slide is a screenshot of the whole 8 to 12 hours. I can't see the exact numbers, but it's about 8 to 12 hours of the sleep study that was done. And what you see in the bottom half is an epoch. So an epoch is a small part of the PSG that looks at whether it's a 2 or a 3 minute window. I can't see the exact numbers, but it's probably a 3 minute window. And you can see there are the squiggly lines in the middle are the representatives of the bands that go around your chest. And so you can see where the points where the squiggly lines meet, which is paradoxical breathing. The third line from the bottom is where the saturations drop. And you can see about 5 or 6 blocks where the saturations drop by more than 3 from the baseline. And this is called...
So this is the baseline saturation, and now you see that the saturation has dipped, right?
Yes. And what you can see, the squiggly lines on the top where the chest and the abdominal bands meet is representative of paradoxical breathing.
So normally they are supposed to be synchronizing with each other. The moment you think the paradoxical, as in one moving up and down, not synchronizing, there is something
exactly. So this is that 3 minute window or a 2 minute window. And what you see in the top half of the slide are those big red marks, which occur probably about every 90 minutes. And these are probably representative of the REM packets. So this is the rapid eye movement sleep stage where these events are occurring. So looking at that, without looking at the exact numbers, I can tell you this is probably a boy or a girl with some obstructive sleep apnea.
Okay. So what are the common causes of obstructive sleep apnea? I think we've already dealt with. We won't go too much into detail of this. We have either allergic rhinitis, as Dr. Sagar has already mentioned, obesity, and we have some syndromic presentations also. But what people are aware of, what is called as an obstructive sleep apnea. We also have an entity called as central sleep apnea. So Dr. Srikanta, do you think that these children with central apnea, first of all, what is central apnea? Do they also present with snoring?
So central apnea is a condition wherein the child would stop breathing during sleep. So child would stop breathing in sleep during obstructive sleep apnea as well as central apneas. But here, the obstruction will not be that much significant. That means the impulses that comes from our brain to the muscles of respiration are actually negated or will stop. So central apneas, we have a specific criteria for it when we can diagnose central apneas. And if the number of the central apneas is beyond a certain number, then we call this as central apneas. So
what is this particular event that you can see here?
So basically what we are seeing here is so we have the airflow patterns here, the nasal pressure transducers, the oronasal thermistors, and the chest leads, when the abdominal leads here. And these leads, as you see, are recording, and suddenly all the 4 leads have have picked up nothing. So neither the nasal pressure transducer nor the oronasal thermistor or the chest and abdominal leads are completely flat. We call these as central apneas. That is, nothing is being picked up by any of them. And usually this happens when the impulses from the brain, which transmits signals to your respiratory muscles, are completely withheld or are not transmitting. And this usually happens in children who, this we usually see in children who have obstructive sleep apnea. So obstructive sleep apnea, wake up with a significant amount of choke, and then suddenly go into this particular central apnea, and then again start breathing normally. So that is normal for children, and that is something that we do consider normal. But if it goes beyond a particular number, then we start evaluating them for central nervous system causes. In children whom we are looking for central apneas, like CCHs, the hydrocephalus, so in those children, we are looking for central apneas, and if the central apneas are quite significant in these spect of children, then we start looking at hypothalamic dysfunctions, particularly in CCHs and hydrocephalus.
Fine. So I think it is clearly important to treat these children to try and pick up these kids from our normal clinic, which might be just there under our nose and we might not be seen. Okay, so I think we are not going to go again too much into details. This is what the first line treatment would be in an obstructive sleep apnea. Finally, we go to the last case where we have a 6-year-old boy with history of fever since last 10 to 12 days. The fever has been high grade, continuous, for which he was given a short course of antibiotics, but the breathing worsened. And now the child has developed, or he already had a wet cough, which is also got worsened, and he has intermittent coughing with decreased appetite, history of chest pain, which is aggravated on lying down, no history of any allergy, TB contact, or any long-term illness, no recurrent illness. On examination, the child was febrile, very toxic, tachypneic, tachycardia. Saturation, the child is not able to maintain saturation on room air. He has evidence of respiratory distress in the form of recessions, no cyanosis, and no clubbing. The air entry is decreased on the right side. And this is what you are going to hear. Okay. That's I think this is very obvious that we hear. These are the second time. This is kind of spilling into your expiratory phase as well. Okay, so Dr. Hemant, what did we just hear? What kind of a respiratory noise would that be?
So these are the sounds of what are called crackles. So crackles are non or discontinuous sounds that can be heard almost like bubbling or crackling. In some countries, it's called crepitations, as we learned in medical school. But these.
So, what is the basic pathology behind these crepitations, and is there any difference, or is it important to know whether the crackles are fine crackles or coarse crackles? Does it really matter?
So the coarse crackles are usually heard. So the fine crackles are usually heard when you have the sounds or the air coming out of from popping sounds through secretions, through mucus. Whereas the coarse crackles are usually coming from the larger airways, or when you have an established pathology like bronchiectasis or a bronchogenic cyst. So in this case, it was very evident that these were fine crackles.
Okay. So this is the X-ray chest which was done. Dr. Sagar, would you want to comment on this X-ray?
So, as history is very much suggestive of there is some infective pathology going on in the child, and on history itself we know there is some parenchymal pathology is involved, and on X-ray of this child of AP view can be nicely seen that there is a right upper lobe consolidation, as well as there is a costophrenic angle is also right side is obliterated. So there is some amount of fluid is also getting involved. So this is a case looks like consolidation with effusion. So either it could be a syn effusion or it could be a evolving empyema. So we don't know exactly.
Okay. So if you have a child who's if you're going to hear these kind of crackles,
I think Dr. Manisha has again frozen.
Yeah.
So just playing a devil's advocate here. So can we call that
anything like, if a child is, sorry?
She's back.
Yeah. Go ahead.
We can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello?
You can.
Go
ahead.
Yeah, Dr. Srikanta.
Yes.
Yeah, so this child began with a pneumonia, had fine crepitation or coarse crepitations, And do they disappear or do they worsen when the child gets, enters any complications? Like, would these crepitation help us?
So basically, when the child starts with a pneumonia, the consolidation goes through 4 processes, as we all know. And at the end of the process, that is in the resolution, from the red to gray hepatization to the resolution stages, when the pneumonia goes from one stage to another, or also has complications, from the red to gray hepatization, the lung sounds become significantly reduced. We hear less amount of crackles, or if there is any complication in terms of pleural effusions to empyemas, again the sound of crackles becomes significantly diminished.
So is there a corroboration between the intensity of the sound and the pathology which you see on X-ray?
Absolutely, absolutely. So first thing is, yes, when at the start of infections, and as the infection becomes more worse and worse, the crackles becomes disappeared, or it becomes significant in intensity, and during the resolution it becomes even more significant. So you can hear crackles being significantly heard during resolution first. And like we already discussed, during empyemas, during effusions, the sounds of crackles become significantly reduced. And most importantly, if the child develops complications like an abscess, or child develops complications because of the underlying pneumonia like secondary bronchiectasis, again the sounds of crackles becomes quite significantly increased. So again, intensity of crackles also to a certain extent gives us a little bit more about where the child is hitting, or how much significantly the crackles are reducing in intensity.
Right. Dr. Hemant, you want to add anything to that? Dr. Hemant?
No, I think Srikanth has almost covered everything in there. The important bit is what happens from here on, because that X-ray does not look good in terms of the evolution of the disease.
Yeah. So just wanted to add something there, because can you just go back to the X-ray? So it's not only a unilateral pathology, it's a bilateral pathology. Okay. And it's not only involving the right upper lobe, it is also involving, and you can see there's a small cyst in the junction between the consolidation and the normal lung, a small cystic swelling there, on the right side. On the right side, yeah, that seems to be like a cystic swelling. So this can be a necrotizing pneumonia that is evolving, or this can be just a lung abscess which is evolving. And there is a significant amount of consolidation even on the left side, with the obliteration of the costophrenic angle as well as the cardiophrenic angles. So it's a bilateral pathology, and like Dr. Hemant has mentioned, this child doesn't look good, at least on the X-ray. So probably a worsening pneumonia which is evolving and could evolve into ARDS.
So, Dr. Sagar, would you want to do any other investigation for this child, like an lateral X-ray or an ultrasound?
Definitely, but as Srikanta said, your history does not correlated with this X-ray at all. So what I feel is it's better to do, rather than going immediately for CT scan, it's better to do the next investigation of choice would be doing USG chest. And it is easily available and it gives a lot of information. So the message is clear cut that you should not go directly to the CT scan when you're suspecting something like empyema and bilateral pathology. So on USG, USG photo
Dr.
you can
Hemant,
see.
Anything on the ultrasound? Sorry, Sagar. Yeah.
So
go on, Dr. Sagar, go ahead.
Yeah, so on ultrasound you can see there is a fluid in the pleural cavity, as well as there is a septi formation, and there looks very thick septi. Some moving septi can be seen, but there is definitely thick septi can be seen. So there is a empyema forming in this child by looking at this USG chest.
Okay. Dr. Hemant, you want to add anything to the ultrasound?
What is important is the what does the lung below looks like, and looking at that, there's probably a lot of significant consolidation as well. The pleura also looks to be quite thickened, and this is something which may, looking at the history and the lack of correlation between the X-ray and the history, this is evolving into a serious disease.
Yeah. So in this case, again, like we said, we are not going to go too much into the management of the disease. So any take-home messages that each one of you can give, Dr. Shrikanta, regarding these kind of respiratory sounds that we may need to be here and we should not or shouldn't be ignored?
Yeah, so basically when you are off, so we had a small discussion about the striders. So I had mentioned about the inspiratory strider, the biphasic striders, and anything beyond our third or fourth tracheal rings has to be always called as V's. And we haven't gone too much into the differential diagnosis in the sense we haven't mentioned all the causes of the striders, that is inspiratory as well as biphasic strider, as well as expiratory wheezes or P's, but we have covered most of the commonest causes like laryngomalacias, laryngeal webs in the congenital striders or inspiratory striders, to some of the causes of biphasic stridor like papillomas, hemangiomas, as well as subglottic stenosis. And apart from that, we also have wheezing, monophonic wheezing, polyphonic wheezing. We've dealt with the differences between monophonic and polyphonic. And if a child or if any person presents with a monophonic wheeze, always there should be a differential diagnosis already running in your mind about what could be the pathology. And crackles per se, I would have played devil's advocate there. Can that be a stutter rather than crackles? Because a stutter also makes the same sound. And if the child has had not significant clinical signs and symptoms, and saturation is also reasonably okay for the X-ray that you showed, I was actually playing a devil's advocate, asking if that is a stutter and child has a submucosal cleft, or child is having a laryngeal cleft, which is causing...
It is a little on the stutter is usually a little on the lower pitch. It is a little lower pitch kind of sound. Yeah.
Apart from that, again, snoring is a very important, the important clinical entity that is being misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed in our country. And at least from one of the studies recently, 50% of people do not know or would say snoring is normal in children as well as adults. So snoring is something that...
I think it's a common notion that if the child is snoring, as in he's in deep sleep and good sleep.
And snoring has to be evaluated. At least the history has to be taken to make sure that this is not obstructive sleep apnea, or there is no other entity which is complicating in this particular child, and definitely have to be spoken to, and a proper history would definitely suffice here.
Dr. Hemant, what about you? You want to give on any take-home messages for our clinicians, our pediatricians?
I think of all those 4 points you put up on the slide, the one that is probably the most ignored is the snoring aspect for me. And that's mainly because most of my work involves obstructive sleep apnea. And this is where the awareness of how snoring affects daytime functioning, nighttime sleep, and all the behavioral aspects is under-recognized in the community. And this is where, within the pediatric community, we need to be more aware of how snoring can affect, and and it's important to rule out obstructive sleep apnea as the cause of snoring and not just assume this is primary snoring.
Right. So basically what happens is polysomnography is not very readily available. There are not many expertise which are available for diagnosing pediatric sleep apnea. I guess we are still in the embryonic stage. We are still evolving over it. Dr. Sagar, you want to give any take-home messages regarding these?
Yeah, so take-home is straightforward. So whenever you feel something ominous, just other than the sounds, like suppose somebody is wheezing very early in life, and with your regular management not improving, it's better to consider for referral, as well as stridor, which is, as I mentioned, with anything other than stridor, like failure to thrive or choking episodes in between, or recurrent admissions. And crackles, of course, there are so many patients. It's not crackles can be seen only, can be heard only in pneumonia, but there are patients who have crackles intermittently also and continuously also. So most of the time we just ignore, and then found to have hypersensory pneumonitis like diagnosis. So it's not only the sounds, but along with that, your general examination is also very important. So most of the time, crackles is very well heard by pediatrician, but clubbing is missed, and you're missing something like some chronic suppurative lung disease like bronchiectasis because of cystic fibrosis. It could be because of something like primary ciliary dyskinesia. So we should not just take those sounds. Along with the sounds, it's your general clinical examination and how's the child well-being in between the episodes are also very, very important. And it's always better to take the help of expertise and have a contact with them, so that we can better manage these all children's very well. So that's what is my message.
So right. So take home message from my side would be your adventitious sounds are very important.
I think we have lost
Manisha.
Dr. Manisha again.
Shrikant, you finish. Or Hemant, you finish. You give the take-home messages.
No, I think this was a very good discussion about going back to the basics, taking a good history. I think taking a good history is the most essential part of respiratory pediatrics, and doing and interpreting the signs in such a way that it either makes sense, or understanding that some of these signs, as in the last case, may be out of proportion to the history that is given to us. I'm not sure how we are going to ask people's questions now, because I think it's either Dr. Mayuresh or Dr. Manisha that has the access to the questions.
I'm trying to access the
questions. Mayuresh, we are not able to hear you. Please.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
No, please.
Your pitch is really low.
All right. I suppose you can hear me now?
Yeah,
better. Are there any very specific questions? Because I think I understand we have been doing this for about 90 minutes and people may be getting ready for the lunch.
Right.
So we'll have about 2 or 3.
I will just give you 2 or 3 relevant questions. Actually, there are 176 questions which have come in.
Wow.
I'm trying to, So one of the questions which I can see here, the page is pretty slow. How to differentiate between normal snoring and sleep apnea? This is one of the questions which has come in. Right. This is from Dr. Alpa Shah from Mumbai.
Okay. I'll volunteer to take this question.
Yeah.
So the simple answer is it is impossible to differentiate simple snoring, which is, I'm assuming what they mean is primary snoring, from sleep apnea. And this is where history in terms of diagnosing sleep disordered breathing is almost useless. What may help is other corroborative history pointers like pauses in breathing. Is there any effect on daytime functioning? Is there an effect on with respect to enuresis? And all these other pathologies can help us come to some sort of a plan about where to go. But a simple oximetry can help. But I guess Shrikanta can answer this better in the Indian scenario.
Right. So basically, like Dr. Hemant was saying, history is going to be the predeterminant for subjecting these children to further diagnostics. So history of snoring alone will not be sufficient. So if a child has open mouth breathing, frequent tossing and turning, as well as gasping and choking during sleep, children can also have significant amount of nocturnal enuresis, so nighttime bedwetting, as well as a child wakes up in the morning unrefreshed, child wakes up in the morning with a headache. Particularly the older children wake up with headaches, as previously discussed, and poor scholastic performance. Child was doing well in the school and suddenly not doing well. Child becoming extremely hyperactive, attention deficit, significant behavioral issues. So if a history, if a certain amount of time, that is, if 5 minutes of your time is spent on sleep history, you can actually find out that significant amount of population do have obstructive sleep apnea, not primary snoring. And most importantly, these are the children who would warrant a pulse oximetry initially if the parents are not really comfortable with the sleep study, or if the parent is comfortable with the sleep study and you have the facility of having a polysomnography, yes, subjecting them to a polysomnography will be definitely the way to go forward.
I just wanted to add one thing. Most of the children, because of their younger age, daytime drowsiness is very, very less likely seen in our scenario. But as Srikanth and Hemant mentioned, the scholastic performance and sudden behavioral changes, hyperactivity, that is more very, very important. And because of this children drive, even after you can see after food we may become a little drowsy, but children, they tend to start playing. So similar way in pediatric also, even though they have significant amount of obstructive sleep apnea, they tend to play, but the definitely behavioral change. Tell parents, if they are not 100% sure, or if they are not ready to go undergo polysomnography, what I tell them to take a video today night or whenever they possible, and just get back. Then we can easily tell them so what is happening exactly during that video session, and then we can go ahead and do the polysomnography. Because most of the Indian parents, they don't they are not ready to accept all these concept which is coming now in India.
Right. Dr. Mayuresh.
Yeah. Dr. Ambekar is asking, does anaphylaxis cause localized lung lesions? Dr. Ambekar from Mumbai.
What?
Localized. Does anaphylaxis cause localized lung lesions?
So, see, to that question, I would say yes. We have had hereditary angioneurotic edema, which is because of complement deficiency, can definitely cause only subglottic edema. Nothing else, but only subglottic edema. Children coming to us with significant amount of only stridor. But if it is because of food allergy, unlikely, because food allergies usually causes pan reaction, that is from our lips to our oropharyngeal airways to our subglottis to our trachea. So to that question, a few conditions can cause, like hereditary angioneurotic edema, but if we are talking about anaphylaxis because of foods or drugs, unlikely. I hope that answers. Right. Anybody wants to add anything else?
No, I agree that anaphylaxis in the purest sense is a generalized problem. It's not a localized disease. But yeah.
We'll take one more question. How common is tracheal tug? In our setting, we have seen about 3 cases in 5 years. This is a question which is asked by Dr. Pratibha Patil from Solapur.
I didn't get that question. Can you repeat it again?
Yeah. How common is tracheal tug? And in 5 years, she has got somewhere around 3 cases which she has seen of tracheal tug. Dr. Pratibha Patil, Solapur. Tracheal tug.
So tracheal tug is a manifestation of respiratory issues. I'm not exactly sure how it can be. The incidence is quite high, and the incidence depends on the modality of presentation. So tracheal tug is quite common in younger ones rather than older children. So in infants, you can see a lot of tracheal tug because of the fact that their rib cage is not fully ossified or not fully developed. But yeah, I think it's the incidence is a lot higher when children present with acute respiratory distress, and it's possible the type of patients coming may be different in the locality where you mentioned.
Okay.
Anything else to add, Shrikanta or Sagar?
I think that's reasonably good enough, because what we see in our day-to-day practice is a significant number of tracheal tugs, particularly in children with pneumonia, children with stridors, children with significant amount of upper airway problems. Tracheal tug is quite significant.
Asthma is one of the commonest. Asthma is one of the commonest cause for tracheal tug.
Right.
Right. So I suppose we have got many questions, but many of the questions are pertaining to the treatment of those 4 cases which we have presented, and that is beyond the purview of today's webinar. So we will not take those questions. Majority of the questions which pertain to the diagnosis and the differential diagnosis of these cases, 4 cases we have taken up. So I think with this, I would like to thank all the 3 speakers as well as the moderator for such an excellent and informative talk which we have had today. I would also like to thank RespiStrong for sponsoring today's webinar. And if anything you would like to add, or else you can close.
No, it was a pleasure, Dr. Mayuresh and Dr. Manisha, who's not on the screen at the moment. And it was nice interacting with Dr. Shrikanta and Dr. Sagar. And hopefully we'll have another session. We'll be able to answer those questions with relation to the management of these patients. But thank you very much again.
So thank you. So until next time. Yeah, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
So until next time, stay safe, and we'll see you. Thank you.
Stay safe. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, you would like to add something?
I think I lost everyone in between.
Yeah, actually we had closed the session. All right. So last.
Are we on?
I don't know whether we are off the.
No, we are still on.
Are we still on the YouTube
recording button?
Okay, fine. I think everybody has probably given the take-home message before we wind up. I think, everybody's already given a message that we need to refer anyone or any child who comes with an abnormal adventitious sound, something which is not looking good, something which is not sounding good, and obviously depending upon the clinical features. I think last bit, I would want to thank all the speakers, Dr. Hemant, Dr. Shrikanta, Dr. Sagar, Dr. Mayuresh, for their valuable time and helping us understand these kind of sounds, though we could not deal much in detail about all these sounds. And I once again want to apologize for the technical glitches on my behalf. And I would extend my thank you to our sponsors, Centaur Pharmaceuticals, for helping us arranging this webinar. And thank you once again, the entire team of pediatric pulmonologists. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.